I woke up this morning with a pit in my stomach, and I'm sure I'm not the only one. I was 7 years old when the assassination attempt was made on President Reagan, and because I was 7 years old, I don't have a lot of memories of it, but I do remember sitting around the living room and the television with my parents who were gripped over this thing that had happened to our country. And because it happened so long ago in my life, if you had asked me yesterday morning if that era of American life was over, I probably would have said, yeah, and I really hope so. And it's obviously not. I am grateful that President Trump seems to be okay. I'm so sad about the two people who woke up yesterday just to go and participate in American political life, and one of them lost their lives and one of them is fighting for their lives. I'm sad, I'm anxious, I'm angry, worried. I went to bed with a lot of questions, and I woke up this morning and some of those questions were answered, but now I have more questions. And so, maybe you can relate. I am unsettled, and I don't know. I don't know what to say. I don't know how I don't know. I'm a praying sort of guy, and I don't know exactly what to pray for. I mean, yeah, peace and brotherhood and love and justice and forgiveness and all of that. Like, I get the big picture stuff, but the details, the granular prayers, I don't know. The opening words of Psalm 24 this morning kind of sound how I usually am in these kind of moments when I don't know what to pray for. The earth is the Lord's and all that is in it, the world and all who dwell therein. I think where I'm at today is, Lord, this is yours, and we have made a right mess of it again, and I need to have trust that this world is still in God's hands, and that although things really aren't okay today, that if we are in God's hands, they somehow will be. And that's what I got. That's it. I thought about totally scrapping my sermon this morning, and I decided not to. And I think sort of some of what I had intended to say sort of also speaks to this moment. I've had a sermon brewing for a couple months now on transition. I've been waiting. I waited till this week. And so I'm going to give it. I'll be honest, it's a little longer than a sermon I would like to preach in the middle of July. But I've tried to pare out what I can, and I kind of think everything else is important, so I'm just going to give it. So the psalm this morning has that verse about everything being the Lord's, but there's also that verse in the middle of it that says, who shall ascend the hill of the Lord? He that has clean hands and a pure heart. Well, what's the hill of the Lord? In the Bible, and particularly in the Old Testament, the hill of the Lord almost always refers to Zion, to Jerusalem, but not just the actual earthly city of Jerusalem, but also the heavenly city of Jerusalem, that ideal that God is pushing us towards, that thing that when God's will on earth is done as it is in heaven, then we will be on and in the heavenly city of Zion. And so, who shall ascend that hill? The psalmist says, those who have clean hands and a pure heart. The heart in the Bible, but just like in normal human discourse, is always a metaphor for like who we are at our core. And so when we fall in love, we talk about giving someone our heart. And When something happens to that love, we talk about being heartbroken. And we're, of course, not talking about the organ in our body that has 4 ventricles and exists right here. We're talking about the core of our being. And so a pure heart, a pure core of our being is talking about sort of who we are, and that who we are, it would be pure and right and holy and good and just and everything that as God wants it, that everything that who we are is just as God intends it to be. And that our hands might be clean mean that what we put out into the world is good and right and just. That those things that are inside of us, if they're good, would come out, and what we make with our hands, how we fashion our life and the world around us would be good and right and just and all of that. The church that sponsored me for ordination, the church that Karen and I were married in, is a historic church. It's in Western Maryland. It sits on a little hill. There was a couple original buildings, and the recent building, the current building, was built in the early 1800s, and it's beautiful and wonderful. And there's a stone archway that separates the area where the people sit from the area where the altar is. And on that stone archway, carved into the stone, are these words: "Who shall ascend the hill of the Lord? He that hath clean hands and a pure heart." And why did that congregation decide 200 years ago to do that? Well, part of it was because they're on a hill, and it's a psalm about a hill, and so they wanted to incorporate that. Part of it is also everything I just said about this psalm being about what's inside of us and putting out to the world that which is good. But there's more. There's another side to that story. And I got to tell you a little bit of history. That area, that region of Maryland that is sandwiched right between West Virginia and Western Pennsylvania is a coal mining region. And historically, 200 years ago, the coal mines that were in Western Maryland were owned, operated, and managed by people of English heritage. People who came to this country from England. And what brand of Christianity do the English tend to be? Anglicans. And in America, we call them Episcopalians. Those were our people. The people historically in that region of the country who worked in the mines with the helmets and the lanterns and the pickaxes historically tended to be from Scotland. Some from Wales, but mostly from Scotland. And what brand of Christianity do people historically from Scotland tend to be? Presbyterians. So in Western Maryland, there are these churches, and they tend to be smaller church buildings because they were built for a smaller group of people and their families to worship in, the owners, the operators, the managers of the mines. And then their Presbyterian counterparts in those towns tend to be larger because they were serving a larger population of miners. The church that sponsored me for ordination and that Karen and I were married in and has that arch with those words on it is in the center of the town of Cumberland, and directly across the street is the Presbyterian Church. And of course, that congregation carved those words in for everything I just said because of the good things that Psalm 24 has to say to us. But they also carved those words in there to make a statement. Think about the hands of a coal mine owner or someone who's in coal mine management, someone who's not working with coal but is working with people and paper. What do their hands look like? Are they gnarled and calloused and everything, or are they soft and white and clean? Probably like soft and white, like mine, honestly. And then think of the hands of coal miners. Before coming to Basking Ridge, I gave communion to a lot of coal miners because the little church I served out there was in a coal mining town. And I'll tell you, their hands are gnarled and calloused and stained the color of coal. And so when those Episcopalians, 200 and some years ago, put those words, "Who shall ascend the hill of the Lord? He that hath clean hands and a pure heart." They were making a dig at the people across the street. And part of it was a nationalist dig. It was the bravado that goes about the English against the Scots. Some of it was a classist dig. It was the owners and management, the upper class, making a stab against the lower class, blue-collar workers. And some of it was a religious dig, the Anglicans taking a swipe at the Presbyterians. And how incredibly sad. I was married under those words. And like 99.9% of the people who walk into that church and see it go, "Oh, that's beautiful and lovely." And those words, "Oh, from Psalm 24, beautiful, lovely." You got to dig under the surface to know the history of why they were up there and how those words betray the breakdown of Christian community. We're talking about one group of Christians swiping at another group of Christians who agree on like 98, 99% of theology, like disagree on just a couple minor theological points, and yet took an opportunity to chisel into the fabric of their building and over their altar, to take all of their classism and their nationalism and their judgmentalism and their hatred, and to direct it at their neighbors across the street. It's the breakdown of Christian community. I use the Psalms in prayer every single day of my life, and so I come across Psalm 24 often, and every single time, the first thing that comes to mind is how sad it was how those words were used. We can do better. Which brings me to my second story, which also comes from Western Maryland. It comes from my time in Western Maryland. I was the priest of 2 congregations out there before I was called to some place in Basking Ridge. And in one of those churches, while I was there, we made the decision together, collectively with the vestry and some other people, to move our baptismal font. We had a baptismal font, sort of like this one over here, except that it was solid stone, heavy. And it sat by the back door of the church, sort of like out of the way. You could walk by it and not even know it was there. And so we made a intentional decision while I was there to move it, and to move it into the center of the congregation. We were making a theological and spiritual point that we were a community that was gathered not around a priest, but around the death, life, and resurrection of Jesus Christ that is made known in baptismal waters. And we wanted that font right in the center of our community, and every time we came up for communion, we wanted to pass that font and be reminded of our baptism, which is a lovely sentiment. And it was great. And I'll be honest, not a single person said a single thing about that was against the moving of that font until I was called to some church in Basking Ridge, New Jersey, and I left. And I was sitting probably right under where Mike is sitting right now in my office when I started getting phone calls about this congregation that had devolved into arguing, infighting, name-calling chaos around the placement of the altar. There were people that were threatening to leave the church over the placement of the altar. There were people that were threatening to stop giving to the church because of the placement of the font. There calls were made to the bishop, demanding that the bishop call the priest there to move the altar, the font back where it belonged. And it was really sad to get those phone calls in my office, because this congregation that I loved, that I just left, had all the goodwill, all the good stuff that we were doing, all the mission and ministry that was going in the right direction. It all stopped because of this fight over the font. And part of that was sad because it was so clear that it had nothing to do with the font. I mean, who cares where you put a font, right? I just got back from Europe and I saw a lot of churches over the last 2 weeks, churches that have been around for 700, 800, 900, 1,000 years, and fonts are all over the place. There's no one right place to put a font. And good people who are well-versed in church architecture and the theology of liturgical spaces, like, there's no one place to put a font. Who cares? And the fight that congregation had over that, it wasn't about the font. Christian community was breaking down, but not because where the church furniture was. It was breaking down because people were sad, and people were scared, and people were worried. I had left. What's going to happen? Where's the church going in 2, 3, 5 years from now? And all of those fears of the transition got worked out into the placement of the font. Transitional times in life are stressful. We are creatures. We like things to be the same. We like things where they're at. And when people start changing things, and particularly when the change isn't our idea, we get really anxious and nervous. There are times that are just built into the life cycle of human beings that are transitional times that are hard. I'm living with a 17-and-a-half-year-old and a 20-year-old, and that's a hard time of living, because that time of life, you're not a kid anymore, but you're not quite an adult. You're in between. You're not here, but you're not there. You're in this liminal space, this no man's land, and it's hard. When you have a couple that is engaged to be married, it's a stressful time, and not just because you're trying to please in-laws about the mechanics of the wedding that's coming up, but also because you're not dating anymore. You're not just like boyfriend, girlfriend, but you're not quite married. You're in between, and it's hard as people approach retirement. It's hard. Their entire, for 30, 40 years, their entire way they saw themselves was around this job, and now it's not going to be that anymore. And so what's it going to be on the other side? And it's hard and it's stressful. And those are some of the points of where mental health gets rattled for individuals, but also for groups. When we go through transition, it is hard. And there are things that come up that we are sad about, and things that we are worried about, and things that we are upset about. And sometimes we deal with those feelings and sentiments in a really healthy way. And sometimes we don't. And part of the reason why I've had this sermon brewing for several months is, well, it's obvious. We are going through transition. St. Mark's is going through transition. And it's going to be hard. And it's going to be stressful. It's going to be hard and stressful for me. It already is. Personally, professionally, absolutely as a family, it's hard because we don't know what things are going to look like on the other side. And things are going to be hard here. And that's as it's supposed to be. It's normal. And so what I wish I had said to that congregation when I left it 15 years ago is what I want to say to you today is to take care of each other. If you're upset about the placement of the font, great. Talk to somebody, right? Right now you can talk to me. In a month or so, you can talk to the interim who is coming, or you can talk to Chuck, or you can talk to Boyd, or you can talk to another vestry member, and talk like a normal human being, and friendly and nicely with love and grace, and pass on your concerns. If you see someone else fuming about the placement of the font, remember that it might not just be about the font, but it might be about the sadness and the anxiety and the worry and all the stuff that is going on under the surface that you don't even know about. And allow that to give you some compassion as you deal with that person. Part of what I want to say is that, we can make, as a church, as a vestry, as a discernment committee, we can make the best decisions, the right decisions, the ones that are like textbook right. But if we make all of that and we lose Christian community, we lose the love and the bond that holds us together right now. If we lose that, then who cares that we got everything right? Because we've lost what matters. And if we make some mistakes along the way, and gosh, we're a divine institution that are run by humans, we're going to make mistakes. If we make mistakes and we still maintain Christian community, the love and the bond that holds us together, then in the end, the mistakes really won't matter, and it will be okay. What really matters is our hearts. What really matters is what we do with our hearts and what we put into the world and what we put into this place right here. What really matters is the love, the grace, the mercy, the forgiveness, the joy, the justice that God calls us to inhabit. And if we can do that, the rest of the stuff will sort itself out. Who shall ascend the hill of the Lord? We, with clean hands and pure hearts. Amen.